Okay,
Yes,
we are
go
live
live.
now. Uh, Good evening and welcome to all of you. Today is the third day of our online lecture series. We had two previous lectures, and today we have with us Professor Sayan Chattopadhyay from Barupur College. Mm, Actually, this topic is specially meant for the undergrad students, sixth semester undergrad students of Calcutta University. They have a paper called Media and Communication Studies. Sayan Chattopadhyay will be speaking on that particular paper. So now I would like to welcome Sayan Chattopadhyay and all of my colleagues to this platform, and I would like to ask Meg Boron Haiti, my colleague, to introduce uh, Professor Sayan Chattopadhyay. Thank
Thank
you.
you, Pavel. Good evening, everybody. As you heard, that today is the lecture series, next lecture series, and the title of the series is Understanding Media Key Issues. And as you know, that this is a much talked about issues which are coming now and globally known topics. And to introduce Professor Sayan Chattopadhyay, I'd like to introduce a brief introduction. He's an assistant professor of journalism and mass communication at Barupur College, as you know, affiliated with the University of Calcutta. After a stint as a journalist, he is currently engaged in research involving identity politics and the digital media in India. He has published articles in a number of national and international journals. He has also authored chapters in books on media, gender, and technology, published from Oxford University Press, Palgrave, Macmillan, Stringer, Routledge, among others. His research interests include digital media, critical masculinity studies, and technoculture in developing countries. And today we shall endeavor all the things. And as you know, this is a twofold series. Next series will be on 24th of May. And now, without taking any time, without any delay, I would like to request Professor Sayan Chattopadhyay to introduce the lecture, what he has prepared, and to further for the students to let them know that we have a PPT presentation and hope this series you will enjoy. So here, let us hear Professor Sayan Chattopadhyay. Shayanda?
Yeah. Thank you very much. Am I audible? Am I? Uh,
Yeah,
Yes,
yes,
yeah.
yes.
yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And at the very beginning, I would also like to congratulate the Department of English, Shomiloni Mahavidyalaya, because for organizing this online lecture series, particularly focusing on the undergraduate syllabus, because there are a number of webinars going on and online lecture series are also going on. But hardly one of them are actually focusing on the topics or specific papers of the undergraduate syllabus. So this is a great initiative, and I'm really honored and privileged to be a part of this. Uh, so coming back to the discussion that I'm supposed to do today, I must admit at the very beginning that mass communication and media studies, these are actually full honors post graduation subjects. So it is very difficult to talk about it in one, two, or three lectures, because there are so many different issues, so many different debates and discourses related to this, both in terms of transnational, national context as well as regional context. So what I'll try to do is that I've actually planned this as a very introductory lecture for those who are not really familiar with the issues and discourses related to mass communication, who are coming from other disciplines particularly. So I would simplify certain ideas, certain concepts and categories for the benefit of those audience, while obviously being aware that those categories and concepts are very much loaded and there are finer nuances to it. But for this discussion, I will simplify certain things for the general audience to a certain extent. So the problem of discussing media and communication, mass communication, or I'll come to the different categories of communication later on, is that it is so ordinary, it is so mundane, so everyday, that we generally do not think about this seriously. We don't give any such thought about it. We take it as a very natural phenomenon. It's a process. It's a practice that may or may not have a history. Uh, we are not really aware about it, and we don't really think about it. So, as media thinkers often say, no, this is like a fish, and how a fish is not aware of its environment. Fish is not aware of water. The moment it is taken out of the water, then it becomes aware of its existence, the existence of the water, and it's very much similar to our condition as well. The pervasiveness of the media in which we are situated right now, it's so uh, it is it's very difficult to think about it separately as a critical object of thinking. But the moment someone asks you to uh, you know to not use the mobile phone even for a few days or a few hours, you become anxious. That is what the influence of media, that is what the impact of media in today's scenario. uh, so whenever someone
সায়নদা সায়নদা একটু
yes
একটু একটু ডিস্টার্ব করছি ইউটিউবে খুব আস্তে শোনাচ্ছি, একটু জোরে বলতে বলছে।
okay. So when someone is asked to critically think about media and mass communication, it becomes very problematic. Yet almost everything is known and everybody is familiar with its various aspects, because everybody engages with media on a day-to-day basis, on an everyday basis. But the moment someone is supposed to talk about it or think about it with a critical lens, then it becomes problematic. I'll just want to share my PPT if that's possible. Is it visible?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes. Yes. Uh, as you can all see in the screen, there is a painting. The painting is a very famous one by Pablo Picasso, obviously, which was painted in 1937. But the question is, what does it mean? What message this painting carries with it? Now, this is not obviously an art appreciation class. We are not going to go into this. But what actually strikes us, the moment you look at this painting, what actually strikes us uh, is that the very simple fact that it's a painting. Regarded as a medium, if we think about this painting as a medium, then this painting is no more than that, a paint on canvas, with obviously the mastery of the artist. But it's a paint on canvas. So painting is not always a natural representation of something else. I mean, obviously, you can just Google the painting if you don't know about its historical and artistic contribution, and you will come up with a number of such documents, and you can have your own interpretation. All of you are literature students, so obviously you will interpret in different manner from various perspectives, maybe from a contemporary perspective. But the fact remains that the painting is a two-dimensional. It's inside and outside, the front and back, top and bottom, and all the rest lie on a flat plane. The point is not to look at the canvas in bits and pieces. Maybe that we'll do later on, but to take the whole thing at a glance. And then you may realize, maybe for the first time for some of you, that you are looking at a medium instead of a message. The first thing that strikes you is the medium of painting instead of the message, instead of the so-called representation of something in the real world. So in a sense, the real world is an illusion in painting, at least in terms of modernist painting like this. Only the painting itself, in a sense, becomes real for the audience, for the person who is looking at it as a medium. So it is not surprising that after studying Cubism, Marshall McLuhan, and I'll come to that, came up with his slogan, which is nowadays very popular, even it is sometimes imprinted on the T-shirt. The medium is the message. The statement proved applicable to almost all media, and medium is the message became a kind of a tagline, a slogan for media studies, and almost an universal starting point, one may say, to understand what is media and what are the effects and impact of media on society and others. So Marshall McLuhan got the essence of media theory from the Cubist painters, if you remember. Uh, and just let me change the slide once more. So historically speaking, if you look at the awareness of medial nature of all human expression, it came little late, somewhere at the end of 19th or the beginning of the 20th century. And Impressionism and Cubism in painting were among the first artistic movements to confront viewers with the fact that when they looked at a painting, they were seeing a painted piece of canvas that was imagined and executed by the painter. Marshall McLuhan got the essence of this media theory from the Cubists, who were among the first representatives of what became known as modernism in art. According to McLuhan, the Cubists linked their painting to the medium of film, which was still new at the beginning of the 20th century. And all modernist 20th century art, I mean, sculptures, music, film, photography, and later on, we'll see video art and so on, links the medium through which it manifests itself to a more modern medium in the hope of discovering what was unique in the older medium. So, this tagline, the sentence, the medium is the message, is the core of media theory, one may say, from at least from one approach. But at the same time, if you think about it, it is a distortion of the central thesis of information theory. Because information theory says that communication occurs when a sender sends a message through a channel to a receiver who then either responds or may or may not respond to that message. So, information theory and media theory both try to answer the question of what exactly is being transmitted or exchanged when we communicate and use media. So, the emphasis is on the message and not on the media for information theory. And this is, if we look at information theory, they consider information as or message as certain precisely quantifiable amount of data. Sometimes maybe it is diluted with equally quantifiable noise. I'll come to the idea of noise later. But information is measurable. That is why the message, which is in a sense information, is measurable regardless of the medium in which through which it is sent. In contrast, if you look at media theory as such, the way the approach is that there is much more going on in communication than just an exchange of information. It is not only the message. The medium influences the sender as well as the receiver. So information theory pays no attention to how it does this, but media theory actually pays attention to both the media as well as the message. Because the very medium influences both poles of communication in its own characteristics way. So in a sense, we can say that all media begin as a potential in our bodies, if we follow Marshall McLuhan's ideas, and expand into the public domain, creating a world, and finally end again in our body as sensations, feeling, effects, affects, and the way we react to those. And that again generates a kind of worldview, ideologies, point of view, public opinion, and all that. So, in that sense, we become our media as such. So, just uh, so in a sense, media are extension of our senses into the public domain. This is the specific approach towards media in terms of critically thinking about it. And every medium amplifies that function of a particular sense. For example, the camera or the webcam or the lens that extends, that is an extension of the eye. The computer becomes an extension of the central nervous system. The wheel becomes an extension of our feet. And these are very well known. And the reason the sound in cinema is turned up so high, because we wouldn't hear the soundtrack otherwise, because we are so concentrated on the overwhelming visual imagery of the film that we'll miss the soundtrack, we'll not pay attention to the soundtrack. So in a way, every organ that is devoted to perceiving, monitoring, and regulating the body can be extended in terms of a particular kind of a media and through a mediated communication. For example, uh, if you look at the various movements, camera movements in a film, what are the different camera movements? You are obviously familiar with it, but maybe the terms are not that well known. For example, when the camera moves from left to right or right to left, it is known as pan. When the camera moves from a particular position towards the object or the subject, then it is called tracking. And if if it is on the opposite direction, then it's called track out. If it goes up and down, it's called tilt up and tilt down. All these then there is zoom and zoom in and zoom out. Among all these camera movements, one camera movement is rarely done in film and television. And you'll realize, and if you look film and television closely, that camera movement is zoom in and zoom out. And what is zoom in and zoom out? Zoom in and zoom out is that camera remains still, the subject or the object is at a distance, and by manipulation of the lens, I'm zooming in. And you will see that this particular movement is rarely done in visual medium, in film and television. And the simplest way of getting to know the world is mainly because of all the movements that I've just described. The only movement that you realize that there is a sudden impact in the psychology of the film and television is the zoom. And it is not surprising that it is why it is not rarely used. It's mainly because of all the movements that I've just described, the only movement that our eye cannot naturally do is the zoom. You cannot zoom with your eyes. You can physically move closer to the object or the subject and take a closer look, which would obviously translate into track in or track out, where the camera physically moves closer to the object or the subject or comes back. But you cannot naturally do a zoom through your eyes. And that is why in television or film, you'll rarely see zoom. Very rarely they use zoom. So these are almost kind of internalized. You don't think about it. When someone points out, you may or may not agree, but these things are not, these things become so internalized, and so that you don't think about it. So with media, the traffic is always two-way. It's not a one-way traffic, as we'll see when we discuss what is mass communication or different types of mass communication. And this is true to all media technologies. On the one hand, technology allows us to get to know the world better, obviously, or differently than we could without its support. On the other hand, it provides us with the means of intervening in that world, an entry point into understanding. And the simplest way of getting to know the world is always to reach out to the other. So communication, and of course mass communication, is a process of reaching out to the other. It's a process of reaching out. Now let me clarify at the very onset that most of the time we use the term mass communication and media in an interchangeable way. But since we are studying or trying to study media studies and mass communication, it is important to keep in mind there is a distinction between mass communication and media. To put it very simply, that mass communication is a process, it's a procedure, it's a practice. On the other hand, media are the tools through which that process takes place. Media are the instruments, technological or otherwise, through which that process, the procedure of mass communication takes place. So these are two different categories, one may say. So first, let me deal with the different levels of communication because mass communication is actually one of the levels of communication, as you will see. And then we will enter into the idea of media and what are the different aspects of media. So, media scholars, and one of them very famous and prominent media scholars was Dennis Maxwell, and he suggests that there are various levels of communication, and which can be obviously viewed as a pyramid with a large base of interpersonal communication. Now, how these levels of communication or this categorization of communication has been done, it is done in terms of, to very crudely put, uh, it is done in terms of number of people involved in the communication process. How many number of people are involved in the communication process is one of the key factors through which these levels of communication, this categorization has been conducted. So, at the very best, there is there is interpersonal communication, where the largest number of people are interpersonal communication, where the largest number of people are engaged with. And at the peak, there are relatively small number of organizations and individuals who are transmitting messages or conducting mass communication. Let's first begin with interpersonal communication. Communication at its most basic level is intrapersonal communication, which is actually a communication within yourself. So the moment you think about saying something, the moment you think about talking about something, you are actually thinking about it before saying anything. That thinking that takes place inside your mind, inside your head, inside yourself, is intrapersonal communication. And since you are doing interpersonal communication from the very beginning, from the moment of your birth till the end, uh, that is why it is sometimes said that it is impossible not to communicate. So if someone decides that I'm not going to communicate, the very moment he is taking the decision, he is actually engaging in intrapersonal communication, because he is taking the decision by communicating with himself or herself. So intrapersonal communication is the very basis which you cannot even stop. This is not in your hand to stop intrapersonal communication, because this is so integrated, so natural, so biological. So this is how we think and we assign meaning to all the messages and events that surrounds our life. And this is the basis of all other levels of communication as well, as you can see in the pyramid. Any kind of feedback or response from the receiver of the message is constant, because we are always reflecting on what we have done and how we will react. So intrapersonal communication is the uh, uh, most prevalent form of communication, and is therefore is at the base of the pyramid. That is the building block of all other communication as such. Next we come the interpersonal communication, which is the most common category of communication that we talk about. And this is basically one-on-one communication. So the intentional or accidental transmission of information through verbal or non-verbal messages, uh, message system to another human being, is called interpersonal communication. That's one of the definitions. There are several definitions. It's there in any basic mass communication books. You can look into it. So interpersonal communication can be a conversation with a friend, or maybe a gesture to your friend or family, a nod, a wink of your eye. All these are verbal or non-verbal interpersonal communication. So like communication with the self, interpersonal communication is continual when others are around, because we constantly send out messages even when we do not know about it. Maybe through body language we show that maybe I'm having a physical problem. Through body language it shows that maybe I'm not really concentrating. So all these are ultimately becomes interpersonal communication whenever there is another person in the room. So interpersonal communication provides many opportunities for feedback. Maybe your friend nods or raises an eyebrow, uh, touches your arm. So all these are feedback from the interpersonal communication. Not all interpersonal communications are done face to face, obviously. For example, if you call a particular friend on mobile phone, or if you are sending an SMS to a friend or family, these are interpersonal communication, obviously, but these are mediated interpersonal communication. Why? Because in this case, between you and your friend, there is another technological medium that may not be a digital medium like your mobile phone or WhatsApp. It can be a very old school mobile telephone, which was not digital, but it was a technology in itself. So it was a mediated interpersonal communication. And nowadays we are seeing a proliferation of mediated interpersonal communication with the advent of digital media and personal digital devices, that you are always on mobile phone chatting with someone, or providing a comment, or sharing an image. So that is a interpersonal communication, mediated interpersonal communication. Then we move on to the upper level in the pyramid, and you will see that the group communication, which is almost at the near top of the pyramid and has reached a level of unequal communication. Because in interpersonal communication, the equality between the sender and receiver was at a very high level, because you are actually communicating with yourself. In interpersonal, there is a level of equality because you are in the same room, or it's a one-on-one communication. The feedback is very instantaneous. So so you have to put less effort to establish that commonness between the sender and the receiver. But in group communication, one person is trying to communicate with an audience of two or more people. So group communication, often you will have a person who is making taking the leadership role, who is making the most important communicative intervention, and others are listening to it, others are responding to it. Then somebody else will speak up and he will become the main person. He or she will communicate, and then at that time others will listen to him or her. So in a small group, for example, you know a family discussion at dinner table, or maybe a coach is speaking to young cricket enthusiasts. These in each of these cases, each individual has an opportunity to respond to the leader or someone who is speaking at that particular time, and is likely to do so. But in a large group, in large group communication, when maybe, for example, 100 student class lecture where you have to even speak through a mic, so it becomes a mediated group communication, then maybe the opportunity of each student to respond to that lecture is very minimum, because that would take a lot of time, and generally the options are not there. Maybe one or two students will speak up, maybe five or six students will speak up, everybody else will remain silent. So the inequality of communication in this kind of setup is much higher than intrapersonal or interpersonal. Now we come to the main, our central point of discussion, mass communication. And mass communication, as you can see, is at the pinnacle of the communication pyramid, and it is a society wide communication process, at least at the basic level. It can be an international communication process if that event uh, is worth that. But in that process, an individual or institution uses media technologies to send messages to a large audience, a mixed audience, a heterogeneous audience, and most of whose members are not personally known to that particular person or that corporation or that company. There are various elements that I have already talked about communication, and mass communication introduces uh, some other kinds of elements as well, which we'll discuss later on. So, for example, a nationally broadcast speech by a politician, or a live cricket match for that matter, all these are, or even a popular new novel which everybody is reading, all these are examples of mass communication, because it is targeted towards the mass. And these communications are fundamentally different from the other forms of communication that we have just described. Because first of all, the sender, someone who is sending the information, the message, is by default separated in space. He's not there, and often he's separated in time. If it's a recorded message and it's played on television, on radio, or maybe you are reading the speech in the newspaper in the next day, so it is he or she is separated in space and time from the receiver. Also, the audience is not really known to the communicator, because he or she is addressing, or the corporate is addressing the mass, huge number of people. So it's not possible for the sender to know each and every one. It is not possible for the sender to have a personal relationship with each and every receiver. It's not impossible. So when a communicator appears on television or writes an article for a newspaper, he or she does not know who will be listening or who will be reading, and actually does not have any control on it as well. Even though we have the idea of a target audience, that this film is targeted to children, that that particular book is targeted to young adults, that particular speech is targeted to only the women community, but again you don't have any control over the mass uh, communication process, because you don't know the whether a children's film is being watched by his father or mother. You don't know a message which is targeted, or an advertisement which is an exclusively for a product of a product of a particular community is being listened to, or is being watched by the other community members. It is not in your control. And what is more, that the audience consists of many types of people, that it is generally a very heterogeneous audience to which you distribute your message, you transmit your message, then, and hope that that heterogeneous uh, audience will also include the target audience that you are aiming for. That's the only thing that you can do. So traditionally, mass communication has allowed only limited opportunities for feedback, because the channels of communications are largely one way. So watching a television if you're watching a television, there is very little way through which you can interact with the program producers or the channel. But I agree with you. I know that you are what you would obviously object, that nowadays there are various other ways. Obviously, the rise of interactive communication networks and portable digital devices like mobile phone, laptop, these things have actually increased the way you can give feedback to even to these legacy or traditional media like television or newspaper or radio. But if you look at the earlier practices, one of the ways to give feedback to a newspaper was letters to the editor. It still exists. Very few people write letters to the editor, but that process is still there. For example, dial-in program. Even the radio programs 10 or 20 years back, they used to have dial-in programs where the audience could dial in and give their opinion or request a particular song and that kind of thing. So that interactivity was there in traditional media as well. But nowadays there is a kind of a explosion of interactive digital devices through which you can give uh, your feedback. I mean, YouTube videos, you can give feedback in the comment section. You can give feedback to your favorite RJ by following in the Facebook page, or commenting on his or her Twitter comments. So and that can be that is applicable to a politician, to a celebrity, to a particular channel, to a particular corporation, to a particular product. If you don't like a product, you just go to the Twitter page and you tag that particular product or the manufacturing company, and you just provide your opinion. Most of the time, if it's a very large company, one either the public relation officer or the social media manager who gets back to you and provides his or her opinion or his or her feedback to whatever you have said. So these things have emerged over the years in the last decade, perhaps in India. And but then again, the mass communication in its basic sense remains a communicative practice which with delayed feedback. So feedback is generally delayed in mass communication. Feedback is generally problematic for mass communication. It's not as easy as in terms of interpersonal communication or intrapersonal communication, or even in the case of group communication. It takes time to give feedback and get response. One thing that we have to remember, that this distinction, this categorization that we are doing in terms of number of people involved in mass communication, these are very useful categorization, but these are not isolated categories, you know, which and that these communications can be placed in automatically into specific categories. In reality, there are frequent crossovers, there are frequent overlaps in the levels of communication. I mean, if you consider this specific scenario, what is happening right now, that I'm speaking through my laptop and headphone and everything, and in this specific software there are 4 or 5 people, which would ultimately categorize it as a group communication, because there are 5 people whom we are talking to and we are interacting with each other. But at the same time, this particular interaction is being is streaming on YouTube through another software, and that makes it a practice of mass communication. So it began as a group communication, then with the help of digital media and softwares and hardwares, it became a mass communication. So those people who are within this software, these 4 or 5 people, for them it may be group communication, but for those who are listening to this particular discussion through YouTube, for them it's a mass communication practice. So the levels will overlap, the levels will cross over each other, and may create some specific instances where different levels of communications are taking place at the same time. Now, when we are categorizing these different types of communication in terms of number of people involved, if you paid attention, you will realize there are some elements that we were emphasizing over and over again. So what are these elements that we are talking about? What are the players of mass communication process that we are talking about? You already know it. These are basic things, everybody are familiar with it, but I'm trying to discuss this in terms of a layman's perspective, so I'll just touch upon those issues. There is this old way of describing mass communication process known as sender message channel receiver, SMCR, or transmission model. This transmission model does not do justice to the complexity of the mass communication process, because as you will realize, the sender message channel receiver, it becomes a linear process, linear model of communication. And as we were talking about it, you have already realized that this is not a linear process. There is feedback, there is responses from the receiver, and as the sender receives those responses, he actually changes the message, tweaks the message so that it becomes more effective, or may package the message in a different way so that it becomes much more effective and engaging to the receiver. So it's a cyclical process because there is feedback. It's not a linear process. So another convenient way to describe an act of communication, as Harold Laswell once said, and this is also an old way to understand communication process, is to answer this following question, and that is, who says what, in which channel, to whom, with what effect. So if you remember this sentence, who says what, in which channel, to whom, with what effect, then you will remember each and every elements that are uh, working, functioning within any communication process, and particularly in mass communication process. Who, the communicator or the sender, is one of the most important elements of communication. When critics talk about the media as a potent force, a potential force, they are often talking about the ability of a few large corporation companies or people who control the message that go through the various channels of mass communication and has an impact on the people. So they are actually talking about specific power of the sender who have access to mass communication channels. And these companies, corporations, individuals that we are talking about are the major senders of mass communication process. They are the large bureaucratic organizations or private companies that produce the complex messages by paying enough money, and we receive through the mass media, television, radio, internet, newspaper, magazines. And they employ a large amount of people to conduct this entire process. And this is a huge, uh, it's a very complex, time consuming, expensive process. So one example is that if you look at the end credits, sometimes it is called the end title of a film, you will see that there is a series of names, there are a number of people who are engaged in making a film. It goes on for 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 5 minutes, and there are maybe if it's a high budget film, there may be thousands of people involved with it. And and that is true for any other media. It's not only film. That is true for advertising. That is true for any advertising campaign. That is true for any website. That is true for any uh, uh, radio program. That is true for any television series. So writers, editors, computer specialists, graphic artists, salespeople, content managers, publishers, all of them are involved in this mass communication process. And all of them, in a certain sense, become a sender of the message that me and you are receiving through the mass media channels. So mass communication has generally been thought of a one on many communication with few senders and many receivers, in contrast to interpersonal communication, which involves roughly equal number of senders and receivers. So now if we come to the next one, the message is the content being transmitted by the sender and reacted by the receiver. It's very simple. The message is the content of the communication process. But before a message can be transmitted, it must be encoded, it must be packaged. And encoding requires two steps. One is that the sender's ideas must be turned into a message. A script for a broadcast is drafted, a graphic is created, a newspaper story is written, and any event cannot become a news story. There are systems, there are ways, there are processes through which a particular event becomes a news story. So you have to package it in that way. You have to turn it into a message first. And second, the message must be prepared for transmission. So a script is taped and sent out over the air. The graphic is placed into a web page, or the newspaper is printed. So these processes are there through which the message is prepared for transmission. These two steps are necessary for any kind of message transmitted through mass communication media. So mass communication messages are transmitted rapidly to the receivers. First of all, audience members can receive the message almost simultaneously. For example, a live match or radio broadcast of a political leader, speech of a political leader, or maybe it can be transmitted at a relatively short time. For example, newspaper, the actual events and everything has taken place a day before. You are reading the newspaper at the morning, so there is a short span of time in between. Or occasionally maybe it's over an extended period of time. For example, a DVD is released or a film is released or even a book is published. It took a long period of time, then it is packaged and prepared for as a mass communication content, and then it is released, transmitted, and distributed to a wide audience. So mass communication messages, uh, they sometimes take time, and they sometimes they are almost live, almost sometimes simultaneously available. Mass communication message also tend to be very transient. They are here today and gone tomorrow. Because if you think about newspaper, you are very much interested in reading the newspaper today morning, and the next day you are using it for some other purpose. A new movie is released today, everybody is going to watch it. Within a month you forget about it. A tweet is there, a huge controversy is happening over that tweet. Within 1 week, 2 weeks, several other tweets come emerge, and then you forget about that tweet. So it is generally replaced when something new comes along, and the receiver's attention fades even if the physical item remains, because there are ways to archive it. in digital media as well as in analog media. There are ways, if you want to archive it, there are ways. And obviously, as I have already told you, that it's a hugely expensive process. The entire mass communication, the process of generating, producing, distributing, transmitting mass communication process is an expensive business. That is why all of us cannot engage in mass communication, except with the help of social media. I'm not going to go into the discussion of social media or digital media and how it has changed, because that is an entirely different discussion. Maybe I will do that during the interactive session, or maybe in the next session. Now, if we look at the channel or the medium through which that particular message that we are talking about is being transmitted, that mass medium is first of all is a technological tool. And if you think about newspaper, it consists of black and colored ink printed on relatively low quality newsprint. It is portable, it is readily available, and it is cheap. You can just torn a piece of a relevant section of the paper and you can place it inside your pocket. Or a newspaper also provide local and regional news in greater depth than it is possible in other medium. So the channel, like print media, it includes book, magazines, newspapers, billboard posters. Billboard posters is now considered as outdoor media, but then again, these are printed and distributed. Audiovisual media are there, and that obviously include broadcast television, cable television, video recordings, and interactive media which uses internet and web, social media, mobile media are all there. Now, what happens if we include faxes or text messages or letters or email? Do they fit in the channel of mass communication? This is where it becomes tricky, and as I've already said, that the different levels of mass communication overlap and they cross over. So if you send an email to your friend, then it would obviously, it's a personal communication. But if it's a spam email, when it is sent to thousands, lakhs of people as unsolicited email, then that would constitute as a practice of mass communication. Right. So if you send one SMS to your friend, it's a personal communication. But when various advertisements and promotional campaigns come to you as text messages through your mobile phone, those practices would be mass communication. So these complex overlaps are already there, which you are very much familiar with and you already know. But these differences are something that we need to pay attention to. So the nature of the channel used to transmit a message can change the meaning of the message. I'll give just one example. I mean, think about sports journalism before the advent of television and sports journalism after television came into our drawing room. Because what is happening, if you are interested in, say, for example, cricket, and you get to watch the live match, then you actually know what has happened in the field. If you have seen the entire match, you know what has happened. You know how someone was bowled, you know how a wrong decision was taken by the umpire, what has happened with the in the gallery. All these things are very much known to you. Then why are you going to read about it in the morning newspaper next day? You are going to read about it in the morning next newspaper next day, because that news report about this particular match would talk about different things. What has happened in the green room, the interactions between the players, the conversation between the a senior player and a junior player, which has happened in the green room. Why did they take um, uh, 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 fielding after winning the toss? All these things will be discussed in the newspaper article, in long form journalism, sports journalism. So the nature of reporting in this case, and this is not only true for sports journalism, this is true for almost every kind of journalism or content, media content, that with new kind of technologies, with new kind of mass communication techniques, the content will also change. With new kind of channels, the media, the content will also change. Now we come to the idea of the receiver. And the receiver is the audience for the mass communication message, you and me. That is the people who are receiving and decoding the message, unpacking the message. The term mass can have at least two, meanings when referring to the audience. In one sense, the term refers to the mix of ordinary people who receive the message, the masses. And the other sense, the term refers to the size of the audience. The term refers to the size of the audience. The concept of mass or popular or taste uh, is an old one, and you know about it because all of you are literature students. But the concept of a massive, large audience, it developed much later in the 20th century. The mass audience reading major newspaper, listening to the radio, watching TV serials or going to the most popular films are much larger than the mass that go to events like art exhibition or a classical music conference. They form a heterogeneous audience, an audience made up of a mix of people who differ in age, sex, income, taste, culture, ethnicity, religion, and other characteristics. So receivers, of a mass communication message have traditionally been seen as anonymous audience. This means that the sender does not personally know all the people or even most of the people. This does not mean that the audience consists of isolated people who have no connection to anyone else. Audience members simply don't expect the sender to know who they are. So, so in that way, uh, if you look at social media or digital media right now, there is an increased way of giving feedback, as I've already discussed. And this has also kind of increased the ways of interacting with the program, the ways of interacting with the narrative, the ways of interacting with the characters as well. For example, if you think of reality television programs available on television, I mean Big Boss for that matter, audience members become active participant in the flow of that program by giving vote to particular contestants, by deciding their fate, and whether they will actually advance to the next level or they will go out of the show. These decisions are taken, at least the way the producers like us to believe, through the participation of the audience by voting either through SMS or by through other electronic media. So the interactivity has increased in terms of the receiver. The interactivity has increased because in the traditional mass communication process, the interactivity was very limited, very restricted. Now I will come to the media part. I'll skip certain sections because time will not uh, allow us probably. Uh, so the traditional print and broadcast distinction, I'm not going into the different types of media. The slide is visible perhaps on your screen, and these are very known categorizations. There is nothing to critically discuss about it. But the traditional print and broadcast distinction, print media and broadcast or electronic media, uh, while those are very useful and those are very practical, but it has now become kind of old fashioned with the advent of computer mediated communication or internet mediated communication. Although electronic in technology, computer mediated communication has, you know permanence and effectively unlimited channel capacity, and in this way is more like print media. Computer technology offers opportunities for combining media in ways that never used to be possible. For example, YouTube archives video footages from anyone who cares to post something. If you post anything, it would be archived on YouTube. Wikipedia offers you to edit as well as gather information from uh, freely available encyclopedia. Twitter offers you the opportunity to post. Instagram offers you the opportunity to post pictures and your comments, and it is available to hundreds and thousands of people. Anyone can start a blog nowadays. Anyone can do a podcast. And all these media work their way around. I mean, print media, electronic media, online media, social media, all these media work their way around to in the domain of the social life and try to influence the public opinion. Thus, in a sense, it has taken over the space of what used to be public sphere. The idea of public sphere becomes very important for anyone who is trying to engage with media studies on mass communication, because public sphere gives us an idea of how it has changed over the years, how media has changed the way we 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 interact, how media has changed the way public opinion is shaped. And there you already know, and if you look up, you will get more information about it. The very famous book by Habermas, The Structural Transformation of the Public Sphere, identified the formation of a bourgeois public sphere in 18th century Europe, basically, especially in Britain and France. And prototypically, the European coffee houses were sites of interaction, where everybody is present, middle class men for once on a par with aristocrats, and they had their say in principle on the issues of the day. So it was a site of rational public debate. And there are various, obviously, if you look at it from now, and particularly from the feminist media scholars, and if the painting is visible on screen, that you'll see there are certain communities which were not part of this, the so-called rational space for site for rational public debate. For example, women were excluded on it. If you look at the painting, the women are actually pouring drinks or coffees or tea to the male who are engaged in rational public debate. So there are mm, various allegations that it was not a public debate as such, because various communities were not allowed. Uh, the site was a restricted place, but in a way, it kind of created a space to form public opinion, to shape public opinion. But if you look at the name of the book, The Structural Transformation of the Public Sphere, it gives you a hint that this classical public sphere changed over the years. And Habermas argued that press freedom and open debate were gradually diluted and distorted by commercial considerations and public relations by the middle of the uh, uh, 20th century. Moreover, radical demands had been incorporated to an extent by the welfare state, and politics became detached from popular struggle, and the masses were becoming amused passive consumers, indifferent to the great issues of the day. It is important, however, to note that later on, Habermas in 96, he revised his earlier this pessimistic conclusion, and later he came up with a different kind of a model of public sphere and gave primacy to social movements and campaigns, uh, you know, forcing issues into public agenda that otherwise might not be there. For example, environmental issues and others. So one of the ways to understand this public sphere nowadays, that it has been displaced by media. And what media is doing is that media is setting up certain agendas and giving it to you through the newspaper, through the news channels, and it's telling you what to discuss when you go to office or you go to college or in your neighborhood tea shop. What are the topics that you need to discuss, you need to debate on? These topics you don't get to choose. You are actually being influenced by the newspaper that you read in the morning or the news bulletins that you have watched the previous night. And they are selecting and making a list of important issues, debates, and discourses which you will engage in the next day. So they are deciding on your behalf. So it's not a surprise that if you look at the regional television channels for that, or even the national television channels for that matter, in India, you'll rarely find the international issues, not even the issues related to our neighboring countries. So if there is a military coup in Philippines or Malaysia, it is generally not there, or even if it is there, it's in the seventh or fifth or sixth page. Coverage is very little in television news as well as in print media. And the editors and the gatekeepers, whom we term gatekeepers, the reporters, editors, and the owners of the newspaper and television channels, they will decide what is the agenda for today, what are you going to talk about, and what are you going to debate about. Now I'll conclude with a specific approach to media studies, and we have already ventured into the domain of more critical media studies to a certain extent. And this interesting approach is that the way we understand media, particularly news media that we are talking about, did not exist before the beginning of the 1980s. And why he's saying that is he's saying because the press, what used to exist was the press on the one hand and public opinion on the other. So the press encompassed, all journalists, whether they wrote for daily or maybe weekly papers, film footages for television, independent journalists, documentaries, or even recording for radio. These reporters kept a very strict journalistic ethical code, which said they should report the current events as objectively and impartially as possible, and influence those events as little as possible through their presence and through their reporting. Subjective interpretation and politically inclined opinions were reserved for editorial commentaries, op-eds, and opinion pages, and through which the voice of the people, through which this through those particular pages, the voice of the people, the opinion of the newspaper, or opinion of specific experts were conveyed. So these two, public opinion and the press, these two were distinct domains. The contrast between the objective news gathering and subjective or ideologically tinted uh, uh, news presentation proved to be unstable when from 1980s, when TV cameras were brought into parliament buildings. Politicians began behaving differently. And what happened, and if you look at, there is this very interesting documentary film, Fahrenheit 9/11, um, which is about the 9/11 bombing. And the documentary begins with the speech, the very famous speech of George Bush, stating that America has been attacked. And it begins right a few moments before he actually makes the speech. And we see on screen in the documentary, because it is not seen by the people at that time, these are footages that were actually edited out. uh, the Before he begins the speech, he's relaxing his muscles, he's just making weird kind of faces, and he's like an actor. President Bush is like an actor who is going to act on stage. He's not going to give one of the most devastating speeches that America has been attacked 9/11, but rather he's like an actor on television or film who is just preparing his body, his psyche to perform. And the politicians and others, whenever there is TV camera all over the world, started to deliver performances. So as in any performing art, these were evaluated on how they came across to the audience. The validity of the argument was pushed further and further into the background. The journalists could only conclude that reporting was equivalent to exerting influence. Ever since this discovery, whenever press conference and other staged events are reproduced, you will see images of the photographs. Camera persons are, there. The radio and microphone, everybody is trying to get a bite of that particular person, and those are shown on your screen, on television screen, or even in newspaper images very prominently. So the press's image of its own existence has become an important element of the information presented, particularly in the visual medium. News has become a product which is manufactured and the audience know about it, like any other product, by means of creative industrial process with its specific kind of aesthetics. So the value of the product, news product, depends on speed, its uniqueness, even to a certain extent the drama that it may provide, and aesthetic qualities, obviously. So, and it's proven by viewers rating that, or entertainment viewers ratings, that dramatic entertaining news programs and channels which actually endorses dramatic entertaining news presentations are accepted mm, by viewers, to at least to a certain extent. And I'm not naming particular TV channels, you know the kind of channels that I'm talking about. So it is very interesting to to understand that the media is less and less a collection of machines and their operators. Because the moment you talk about media, or even you think about media, what you imagine is a collection of technologies, collection of devices, or a few people, a journalist, a editor, a camera person. This is what media is in the imagining of the common people. But also, it right now, if we are talking about media, it has increasingly becoming a kind of a mentality. The realization that everything is recorded, but only a few fragments will end up edited as items in a news broadcast, current affairs, or entertainment shows and magazines. And media increasingly becoming something to be scared of. People are becoming fearful of media. There are certain instances where the people were more fearful of media than the local police. If you tell them that I'll call media, they will just disperse. If you tell them that I'll call police, they will stay behind. So to become a news item, one must provide a mediagenic images, a media friendly images, or provocative statements. It has also become commonplace for reporters to ask, can you sum up this issue? Maybe it's a huge environmental issue, a huge political issue, or a very complex novel or anything, that can you sum up it within 15 seconds? You have 30 seconds to respond, within which you have to respond. If you can't respond, then that particular channel will not call you as an expert. Your expertise is in the skill of summarizing a hugely complex issue within 30 seconds or 15 seconds. And this media, the instruments of mass communication, television, radio, newspaper, these are being used to, which was even the press is being used to demonize, to criminalize, to discredit the other party in various aspects, in terms of political, in terms of corporate, in terms of culture. So what has happened now, if we look at media as such, what has happened, that you do not fight for a cause anymore. The most effective option is to stage one's resistance in such a way that media will take notice. Media will pay attention. Media will be interested to cover that particular resistance, that particular movement. So in order to motivate the masses, it has become necessary to make media interested in your resistance, in your movement. So if you want to influence public opinion, you have to package that particular content in such a way that the news media or any other media through which you want to influence, they will pay attention. They'll be interested in that particular message. I'll just ask her how much time I'm left with. So
Sayan, I think
I have to
uh,
oh,
I think there is no time. You can continue to in the next lecture. Of course.
right. Okay. So I'll do one thing. I'll just conclude here, and if there are any questions or anything, then I'll talk about a little more, perhaps. Yes.
Yes, there is a question I can see in the chat box. Pavel, can you show the question on the screen? I will also
Okay, I am highlighting the question from Pradeep Shardar.
our students.
How does interpersonal communication happen inside us? I think he means intrapersonal, maybe. And
It's not
why does a
interpersonal.
particular news react differently to us as it is one?
Okay. Why
আমার
does
মনে হয় যে বাংলাতেও বলা যায় এটা। আমার মনে হয় ও বলতে চাইছে যেটা সেটা হচ্ছে যে যে ওটা ইন্টারপার্সোনাল হবে না, ইন্ট্রাপার্সোনাল হবে আর কি।
inter
আসলে ইন্ট্রাপার্সোনালটা কি করে নিজেদের মধ্যে কাজ করে, এবং একই নিউজ যেহেতু একটাই নিউজ, সেটা এক একজনের ক্ষেত্রে এক একভাবে কিভাবে কি করে রিয়াক্ট করে, এটাই মধ্যে জানতে চাইছি।
ও আচ্ছা, ঠিক। মানে এমনিতে ইন্ট্রাপার্সোনাল তো দ্য প্রসেস অফ থিংকিং, আই এম থিংকিং টু মাই সেলফ, সেই ভাবনাটাই তো ইন্ট্রাপার্সোনাল কমিউনিকেশন। নামটা শুনে ওরকম মনে হচ্ছে একটা খুব বাজখাই ব্যাপার, একটা খুব কমপ্লেক্স ব্যাপার। Maybe it's complex in terms of psychology and others, but for us it's very easy. The moment you are thinking about something, it is intrapersonal communication. The moment you are maybe you are thinking about saying something, maybe you are just you are inside a room and you are thinking to yourself, even that is intrapersonal communication. So interpersonal communication is thinking to yourself. The act of thinking is interpersonal. And why particular, and that this is a very good question, why particular news items are received differently by specific audiences. And this has to do with encoding and decoding. The thing that I have already talked, that any message needs to be packaged in a certain manner, but that does not mean that would be unpacked in an universal manner. It is, for example, if that was true, then every Hindi film would be a hit film. Every commercial Hindi film would actually be a very popular hit film, because there are all the ingredients to make it popular. It has been packaged in such a way that it would become commercially successful. But still, there are huge flops. Why? Because the audience, the receiver, did not unpack, did not decode that particular media content in the desired way in which it was packaged, in which it was encoded. So this difference between encoding, packing, and decoding, unpacking, is the reason why different specific audiences, specific individuals receive the same content in various ways, various manners, or react to the same content in various manners. I আমার
ঠিক।
মনে হয়
হ্যাঁ,
আমি
ফাইন,
এখানে
গ্রেট।
কমেন্টস গুলো দেখতে পাচ্ছি। হ্যাঁ, আপাতত তো কোনো কোশ্চেন নেই।
আর কোনো কোশ্চেন নেই আপাতত। তো
হ্যাঁ,
ইফ দেয়ার
আমি
আর
যেটা
নো ফার্দার কোশ্চেন, হ্যাঁ বলো।
হ্যাঁ, মানে আমি যেটা, the way that I have planned, that it is actually a single lecture which I have
হ্যাঁ,
divided into two parts. In the first lecture, what I have tried to do, I have tried to introduce the concepts which are basic elementary concept of communication, which is known to all of you, but at the same time, these are the concepts which will, categories which will come over and over again whenever we discuss something, critical media studies or whatever we do. These concepts will be discussed. So basic concepts are introduced in the first lecture. And the difference between doing mass communication and media studies, this difference is something that needs to be there in the mind of the person who is engaging with media or mass communication studies, in case students or any one of us. Mass communication is very, to a certain extent, it is quantitative in nature. It tries to quantify everything. It tries to, one of the most favorite research method is content analysis. For example, cultivation theory. Cultivation theory says that if you're exposed to television for a certain period of time, then there will be a mean world syndrome inside your head. So you'll think of the messages and the images in television as real, and you'll think of the world as a mean world. You will become scared of going out. So that cultivation theory may not be relevant in today's world, because the way we understand television has changed over the years. If you look at television in most of the urban houses, smart television, television which is integrated with Wi-Fi, internet connection, it's totally different kind of device than the thing that we used to watch in our childhood days. So the kind of effect, for example, cultivation effect that used to happen maybe in 1950s and 60s, it's probably not there. So it has changed over the years. Even film viewing has changed over the years because the distribution has changed. I wanted to end with this particular quotation from Allen Ginsberg, that whoever controls the media, the images controls the culture. So the moment we talk about media, we have to talk about who owns media, who are the owner of media. You know, if you look at Indian media, there are more than 70%, almost 80% of media is owned by individual or a particular family. So that obviously has an effect on the content or the nature of communication or the way, the angle or the framing of communication that is happening in India or any other parts of the world. So that approach needs to be there in mind, or else it will become very flat, very one-dimensional engagement with media.
Okay, so we don't have any question from the audience. So now I think we can end here. And thank you, Shayanda, for your illuminating speech and for introducing the basic concepts of media studies and communication studies. So we'll meet again on 24th, that is on Monday from 7 p.m. So please be there like today, and we'll continue this discussion. So thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Thank you,
Thank
Shainda.
you, Shayan. We'll meet again soon. Thank you. And goodbye. Good night.
Good night.